Before we jump right into the video, Black Friday through Cyber Monday, everything on the Star Wars merch page is 16 to half off, 50%. So if you want to pick up any Star Wars merch for Christmas time for either yourself or your family, now is probably the time to do it. Now, on with the video. The controversy surrounding Emperor Palpatine Darth Sidious's return for The Rise of Skywalker has actually been one of the most interesting parts leading up until the release of the movie, with it being revealed that in Colin Trevorrow's Star Wars Episode 9, the original director that was attached to it, Palpatine was never a part of the story. However, that the character of Sidious was always prominently in director of The Force Awakens JJ's mind, although at the time of directing The Force Awakens he himself admitted that he had no intention of returning for a future Star Wars movie, even though we know that all changed after Colin Trevorrow was fired from the project and JJ was brought back. It's really interesting to hear JJ Abrams talk about Darth Sidious and his return in The Rise of Skywalker, and how important it is for the Skywalkers that are left as well as the fans thematically, having the Darth Sidious character being the only real character that overarches over all three trilogies, and has a major impact as a massive antagonist over all three trilogies. This is what JJ Abrams said was the real reason Darth Sidious ultimately returned for The Rise of Skywalker, and his thought process on the character. When you look at this as 9 chapters of a story, perhaps the weirder thing would be not to have Palpatine return, or if the character ultimately didn't return at all or make a final appearance. You just look at what the character talks about, who he is, how important he is, what the story ultimately is. Strangely, his absence entirely from the third trilogy would be conspicuous. It would be very weird not to have him appear. That's not to say there was a Bible and we knew what happens at every single step of the story along the way, especially for all 3 movies. But when Larry Kasdan and I worked on The Force Awakens, we didn't do it in a vacuum. We very purposefully looked at what came before. In 7, we chose to tell a story that touches upon specific things and themes and ideas that we've seen before. 2, in the process, begin a new story, but we examined all that came before to ask, where does this feel like it's ultimately going? So there was a discussion about that at the time, yet, like any beginning, you want to put the threads in, but you don't want to necessarily be literal about everything in your story. And then when Rian Johnson was brought on to do The Last Jedi, we met, and we talked about things, and he wrote his story. And when I read the script, I realized this didn't get in the way of anything Larry and I talked about that I thought I'd get to eventually. There were some very specific things we did get to do in this movie that we were laughing and going, oh my gosh, we're finally doing that thing we talked about 5 years ago. When JJ Abrams was actually talked about concept art for The Force Awakens and how it could tie into The Rise of Skywalker, this was his response. There are a few things in that book that we came close to finally doing for sure, but the specifics of Palpatine, I wasn't supposed to do this movie in the first place, so I had a couple of years off to think about it. So when Kathleen Kennedy called and I got back on the train, I started asking, where does this story go? So suddenly we were there and we were having to do it. The rubber was hitting the road. So we went back to the threads that were exciting us and then we found new ones. That's pretty much everything JJ Abrams had to say about Palpatine's return in The Rise of Skywalker. What is interesting is he actually clarifies a few things here. He confirms that it was actually his original intention, if he was ever going to do Episode 9, to bring Palpatine back, and that the return of Darth Sidious was a topic that was discussed while they were actually making The Force Awakens. Admittedly though, JJ Abrams had very little to do with The Last Jedi, so there are no real threads indicating Palpatine's return in that movie. However, again, JJ does explain that he set up threads in his own movie for Palpatine's eventual return, and kind of wrote out a story in his own mind even though he never intended to return to the Star Wars universe. It does make a lot of sense that the main antagonists of the last 2 trilogies would return to be the main final antagonist of the final trilogy in the Skywalker saga, and I do somewhat agree with what JJ Abrams was stating, that his absence would in fact be felt. In fact, it was a major criticism following the events of The Last Jedi that no one was really threatened by any of the villains that belonged in the First Order, including what was supposed to be of course the main villain of The Rise of Skywalker, Kylo Ren. So it does make sense as far as filling a gap for the story. My biggest concern though concerning the project is I really want Darth Sidious's return in The Rise of Skywalker to be explained in depth. I don't want it to feel like something that the filmmakers threw in at the last second. Although they are working making it quite a disadvantage as Rian Johnson left no threads in his story for Palpatine's return. So I'm hoping that the threads that were left in The Force Awakens are enough to pull the story together in full. Admittedly, the return of Sidious does seem like a drastic way to get back fans, but I'll be honest, from what I've seen, it's actually worked quite well, even though there's still a large majority of the Star Wars fan base that is concerned about returning another legacy character. I guess we'll all have to wait and see what The Rise of Skywalker releases December 20th. Nonetheless, that is what J.J. Abrams had to say and explain the real reason why Darth Sidious returned in The Rise of Skywalker, and why J.J. thought it was appropriate for his story. But what are your thoughts on this, and are you glad Sidious is returning? Again, just a reminder, we have a massive sale on the Star Wars merch page for Black Friday through Cyber Monday, where everything on the store is either 16 to 50% off. So if you want to get something either as a Christmas gift for another mega Star Wars fan or for yourself, now is the time to do it. Again, top at the link of the description below. Thank you guys as always for the continued support on the YouTube channel. May the Force be with you and have a great day.